Friends of NRA is your chance to support our Second Amendment rights and preserve America's hunting traditions. Join Friends of NRA at one of our 600 exciting events nationwide. From games to auctions and exclusive firearms, Friends of NRA events are your chance to support a cause you care about while having a great time with patriots in your community. Whether you're a seasoned shooter, an avid hunter or outdoorsman, or passionate about freedom, there's a place for you within Friends of NRA. Visit friendsofnra.org to find an event near you. Stand up for freedom with the Friends of NRA.
This episode is brought to you by Love Hurts. Kiwi Kwan has had quite a career, from childhood roles in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and The Goonies to a recent Academy Award win for Everything Everywhere All at Once. But now Ki finally stars as a leading man in the film Love Hurts. Love Hurts is the perfect date night movie with its mix of over-the-top action, comedy, and a ton of heart. Love Hurts, only at theaters February 7th.
All right, looks like everyone is live. Or, well, recording, not live. We're not live, we're just recording. In this episode, we chat with an international celebrated chef and award-winning cookbook author with a unique knack for finding beauty and flavor in unexpected. With a passion for the overlooked and undervalued, our guest's culinary philosophy aligns perfectly with the ethos of hunters, anglers, and foragers alike. We even have some time for fan questions at the end, so grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and join us as we uncover the art and science behind crafting remarkable meals from bones, fat, offal, bitter greens, and even blood. Let's dive in.
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
As you all have found out, we've got a guest on, which I'll introduce here just momentarily. A couple shopkeeping items. So Hank Shaw's Pig Camp that we're co-hosting with him down in Texas, we've officially sold out. No more seats left. We are operating on a waiting list, and we're looking at plans for later in the year. So TBD on all that. If you've learned about it through various channels and are interested in going, please let us know. The more interest we see, the more we'll try to coordinate future dates. Super excited about that. It's going to be a blast down in Texas. I think outside of that, I have no sort of like hunting, fishing updates. I made the Sika deer front shoulder here recently, actually last night. I chose like a sake soy braise, which then I turned into a sauce, and I'm going to serve it over soba noodles. I wanted the iteration. Soy, sake, soba, Sika. Say that in a mouthful. All right, Adam, over to you.
Got out ice fishing a couple times now with zero luck whatsoever. So I'm going to switch over to skiing, I think, and do that a few more times because I've been freezing my toes off in the lake I live on. Some of the spots that are really heavy with fish are always taken by the older guys in the lake who've earned their right to be there, kind of thing. And I can't seem to find a good spot. So maybe I just need to learn some more about ice fishing, or I need to drop someone down a hole and take over their spot, maybe.
Less aggressively, you get one of those little camera things and put down there.
True. Yeah, I do actually have one of those. I haven't seen much life, but I'll keep at it. Nice. Other than that, I've just been, developing recipes, cooking a lot of food, and hanging out. So yeah,
we're on. I'll go ahead and say it now. We're on the tail end of the sausage book.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which is big news.
Very exciting.
Hopefully, we're going to self-publish a venison sausage book, which should hopefully get all sorted out in the next month or so. So keep an eye out for that. Adam, and myself, two Adams and me, have been working on it kind of leisurely over the past couple of months. So a combination of knowledge to get to a cool outcome, to try to address sort of like broader sausage making questions and techniques and theories and concepts and recipes and everything. So it should be exciting. But I say with that, the next episode we have is part of our Rookies series, where Ken's going to be interviewing another new hunter angler who is new to the outdoors in that mindset. I really enjoy seeing how people sort of come into hunting and fishing and how they've brought about this connection, whether it's food, whether it's, an ethos, like a personal mission, sort of environmental ties. There's a lot of things going on, and always learn something new. And it's awesome to see people's perspective on it. So excited to see and listen to the next episode. But yeah. All right, I'll go ahead and introduce our guest here. So today's guest is a chef, caterer, food stylist, writer, and author of 5 critically acclaimed and award-winning books. They are Bones, Fat, Odd Bits, Bitter, and Blood. Born in Australia and having lived and worked in London, Paris, and Toronto, she has won multiple awards for her work, including a James Beard Cookbook of the Year prize for her book Fat, as well as others from the Beard Foundation, the IACP, and Gourmand International. Her book Bitter was also included in The Guardian's top 10 food books. Mother Jones magazine called her perhaps the most idiosyncratic and underrated cookbook author of the time. That's a good shout out. Jennifer McLagan, welcome to the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Adam. It's fine to be here. That is quite the introduction.
Well, you're quite the person. I'm excited to talk to you. Adam introduced me to your work a while back, and I've been sort of diving into it and catching up. And it's, from a perspective of someone who's very in the weeds with wild food, the connectivity of all the topics and the passions that you have and where it aligns with that is really great.
Yeah, I guess it's what I've always been about, which I didn't quite know when I started with Bones, is eating the whole animal. It's just using everything. It just seems to me in today's world, it's the contract you make. It's a contract you make as a hunter, I assume. But if you're going to eat meat, even if you don't hunt, you really can't be that choosy. You should be eating every part of that animal. You raised it well, you killed it. The best thing you can do is to eat it all. And I assume that's when you're hunting, when you spend all that time tracking, capturing the animal, killing it, that you really want to use every part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those sort of activities and pursuits that you're so vested in it, and then you're so appreciative too, because once you acquire like the animal as a resource, you're like, man, I've got this very unique piece of meat, or organ or bone, or even the hide, or all things like that. And I think a lot more people are seeking to do more with the whole animal, especially in the hunting world. And, we've kind of gone through ups and downs of that. But traditionally speaking, I think that has always been the intent, and more people are coming around to that. So that's sort of how we landed here in this conversation is we're here to sort of encourage the people that are really passionate about it, and then maybe sway the people that are on the fence about like, hey, come dip your toe in this world and use the full animal. So I guess with all that, could you share a little bit more about your background and sort of like your culinary journey?
Sure. As you said, I grew up in Australia, and I'm not a hunter. Just let me know. The only hunting I've ever done is kangaroo hunting.
Okay.
And I was very young at the time, and they used to chase the kangaroos with a truck and a spotlight. So I would say that's not really hunting in its pure form. And of course, this is back like eons ago. No one ate kangaroo. It was just seen as a pest, and so people were trying to kill it to stop it eating the grass that the sheep were eating or something like that. But, that has changed. So I grew up in Australia. I didn't like cooking at all when I was a kid. Like people who write cookbooks always have these great stories about cooking with their grandmother and all that, I don't think either of my grandmothers cooked. I never saw them cook. My mother cooked, but she wasn't brilliant. So I guess I started cooking kind of as a bit of self-defense. And also as an interest. I took a course to learn French through food. And so you would do this cooking, and you learned all the French food vocabulary. And I always think if you want to learn a language, you need to pick a topic that you're really interested in, and that's the way you learn the language. I think like you guys, I went to university. I did economics and politics, which has been extremely useful. And then I decided I could have gone on to do a master's, and I decided I didn't really want to do this. And I'd started cooking. I was working at a local restaurant. I'd started reading a lot of English cookbook authors like Elizabeth David, Jane Grigson. Was really interested in the literary side of cooking, I guess. And so I went to a chef's training school where they took old people. In other words, people were too old to do apprenticeships, and they kind of compacted it into a short course. And I did that. And then I was lucky enough to land in a big hotel. And that time they were like big classic hotels. So there was a chef de cuisine, there was a fish chef, there was this, salad girl, and there was all this regiment was all full of foreigners. There was Hungarian, Frenchmen, and so I learned a lot there, and they actually treated me very well because I wasn't an apprentice. They didn't quite know what to do with me. And then I left to go, as every Australian does, and I went to England, and I worked for Prue Leith, who had a restaurant cooking English food, and she's now quite well known to be in the Great British Bake Off, right? Mm-hmm. And then I worked for the American ambassador in a private home, kind of upstairs, downstairs, went to France, came to Canada, did some cooking, did some catering. And then I think, like a lot of people in the food business, I said, I want to write a cookbook. So after a few brilliant ideas that my agent thought were really stupid, I landed on the idea of bones. And because I'd done a small magazine article on cooking with bones. And I thought, yeah, because a lot of people just throw them away. And I think working as a food stylist, if I had to style one more boneless chicken breast, I was going to kill myself. Like the absolute wasted piece. It's just like, and people would not, okay, it's a little hard to bone out some things, but it's a skill you need to learn because it's pretty easy to buy something on a bone and just cut around the bone. And you've got a nice piece of meat. Chicken, if you want to eat the boneless, skinless chicken breast, go right ahead, but at least keep the bones, at least get the bones and use them because they're extremely useful. And so I just kind of progressed from there, and then that worked, and then I did fat. I wanted topics that were different, that stood out, and that were interesting to me. Mm-hmm. I think I'm a little bit selfish. I'm an only child, so I didn't really care. Like, it wasn't my 10,000 pasta recipes. So I just wanted to do something that was different and interesting. And as you know, with my books, it's not just recipes. There's background, there's history, there's a whole lot of other stuff in there, which is kind of really more interesting than the recipes. So I just kind of progressed through from, bones, fat. Odd bits was obviously the next one to do, Offal. And then after that, I thought, well, people don't think I eat vegetables, so I better do something else. And it's a book that's got much more vegetable content in it, bitter. And then I thought, I'll just go out with a bang and do blood, because no one's ever going to read that. No one cares. But it was really important to me because I think it's a wasted resource. And it's a resource that we should all be using, and they should be a demand for it so we can get it out of the abattoirs into our kitchens. You can get everything else out. So there's no reason. It's just, they just have to have a demand to make it worth their while, because it comes out, it gets powdered, it gets put into sausages, food products, things we don't even know. There's blood in them. So that's where I am.
Nice. And we're going to dive into sort of kind of each one a little bit with some questions that both Adam and I have. But first, one thing I like to ask everybody we come on the show with, what's in your fridge or freezer that you're excited or looking forward to cooking coming up?
Well, there's always fat in my freezer, but there's some blood. I have some blood. And I think I'm going to make blood sausage. Ooh. Which I love. And now I make blood sausage rather than putting it in a sausage casing, which I've done a couple of times, and there's been holes in the casing, and my kitchen has looked like a crime scene.
I could imagine.
I like to do the same mixture and just bake it in like a terrine dish.
Okay.
And then I've got a blood sausage terrine kind of thing, and I cut that into slices. And then I put them in a really hot pan. So one side gets really crispy, crunchy, and then turn it over so it's warm through. So you've got that blood sausage texture, which is delicious. And you've got that crispy contrast with it. And that's, you can do that if you make blood sausages and just slice them up. But for a regular person, it's really easy just to do it that way. And your kitchen will stay pretty clean.
That's I like that. I've never made blood sausage. I've seen it made. I've never sat and done it myself, and I've always thought it'd be that part to be a bit intimidating of like just the whole potential mess of it. But that I think I like that approach of putting in the terrine and then sort of searing it and getting
Yeah, makes it simpler, makes it more approachable, because it's it's absolutely a delicious thing to eat.
Is it pork blood that you have in your freezer right now?
Yes, it's pork. Pork blood is the easiest blood to get, especially if it's just commercially available. But I have had chicken blood, and I have had beef blood in things, but pork blood is the blood I can get to. So all my blood recipes were based on pork blood. But I don't think you'd notice any difference in taste. Some people say there's a difference, but it's a pretty connoisseur kind of thing.
Well, I guess since we're on the topic of blood, we can start there with that book and kind of work our way backwards, just with the natural flow of it. I guess I'm trying to put myself in the mindset. Well, I am in the mindset of a hunter, but as far as like the comparison of wild animal to domestic, I think with domestic butchering, a little more easier to acquire the blood. Part of the process of shooting an animal, or be it with a rifle or a bow or anything, is that they typically bleed completely out. So on the domestic side, how is blood collected, and is there anything that needs to be done once it's sort of like collected?
Well, usually it's collected right after it's killed, right? And in abattoirs and stuff, they have a closed system where it goes into the jugular, like a needle goes into the jugular, so it comes out. It doesn't get cross-infected or anything. So, like before, if you're doing the pig killing, like pigs are always the best because they're pretty clean, they're easy to access, and then it would just be bled out, and then needs to be stirred at that time. It needs to have something in it to stop it from clotting. And they put a chemical in, or they put some acid in there, or even some salt. Friends of mine who've killed pigs, the blood has just come straight out into a bowl out of the pig's neck. It's just basically it's stuck into the artery, and it just bleeds out. Keep stirring it because it's warm until it cools down, and then you use it then. But even blood you buy off the shelf needs to be strained before you use it, just to make sure there's nothing in there, like small little bits of clotted blood or anything like that.
Okay, that's good to know.
And it's easily frozen. Because, I don't know, when you're hunting, does the animal bleed out naturally, or do you have to bleed it out? That's what I don't understand.
They typically bleed out naturally because you're targeting sort of the lungs or the heart through the process of killing them, and that generally leads to a lot of loss of blood, and it will primarily stay inside the cavity. Like they may bleed some from a wound, but it'd stay inside. But then you're potentially getting cross-contaminated with other fluids inside there. So I'd say most hunters I know don't mess with the blood at all.
Okay, so you couldn't put them on some kind of slope and sever the artery and bleed it out into some kind of container? That would be too complicated when you're hunting.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think a headshot pig, like a headshot wild pig, you could do that with. I think if you were quick, there is some danger approaching wild pigs more so than domestic pigs. I've actually collected blood myself from domestic pigs that I've slaughtered for friends on little homesteads, and I wanted to try the whole process out, and doing it by yourself with the way I did it, I shot the pigs and then immediately cut their jugular and collected the blood in a bowl, much like Jennifer described, and then added a little vinegar and stirred it in. But that's quite a hell of a thing to do when the pig's still kicking and squealing. Yeah. There's other pigs around, and it's a very visceral thing. Yeah. Coming to it as a hunter, so it was a interesting experience. But I think if you headshot a wild pig and it dropped dead in front of you, and you could collect that blood pretty quickly if you were incentivized to do so.
I wonder. We have to try it at pig camp and see if it's possible.
Yeah,
I think it's probably at least a 2-man job. I think it would be very hard if you're hunting by yourself to do it.
Definitely,
but.
And I would say definitely, like Adam mentioned, on the wild game side, be cautious if that's something you decide to do, because it's not always that an animal is down. In fact, when has perished when it's down, and you don't want to deal with that quickly approaching an animal to try to acquire blood. So, best bet, maybe a combination of domestic pork blood mixed in with some wild ingredients to sort of try it out if that's the pathway you want to go. But
and that's actually what I did with mine. I think I made some venison blood sausage with the domestic pork fat and venison, And I just kind of winged it instead of following a traditional recipe, which is usually the way I first approach things, but I kind of was just winging it. And then I think I had a little blood left over, and I actually messaged Jennifer on Instagram and asked for, because I knew the blood book was coming out, but it hadn't been put out yet. So I asked for some advice with it. I think you recommended traditionally a rooster blood recipe for me. I can't remember if I made that or not. But it's an interesting ingredient to use. I recommend anyone who has the ability to find some to try it out because, it's just such a different ingredient to use, and it creates some really beautiful stuff.
I think that if people do use it, they should just think about it like eggs, because blood is basically the same protein breakdown as an egg. So any recipe you have an egg in, you can replace it with blood. And one of the easiest ones to do is something like scrambled eggs. So like cook some bacon, and then when the fat comes out, add some onion to it, then whisk your blood with some herbs and salt and pepper, put that in and just stir it until it scrambles.
Interesting.
Wow.
Lots of iron, good for you and delicious. And if that's a bit too much, in my book, but you can just replace it. I have a ginger brownie recipe. So you make brownies and replace the eggs with the blood.
That's so interesting.
And most people will not know the blood is in there. The ginger helps. There's a slight, I don't know if you know, with blood sausages, there's a slight metallicness to it a little bit. So ginger, there's various herbs that will make that much milder. But it's really good with chocolate. Traditionally, sanguinaccio is a chocolate blood pudding that they made at Easter time in Italy. So it's, a very traditional recipe. It's working on that. So you can make blood ice cream, you can make blood brownies, it's just a whole range of stuff out there you can do with it.
These next Valentine's
it's hard
meal,
to
everybody.
Yeah, Valentine's Day meal.
Dessert.
I've done it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the blood pudding, but what's your sort of like favorite thing to do with it, with blood?
With blood?
Yeah.
I like making meringues with it.
Oh. Really?
Yeah.
You can
whip it. You can whip it. It takes a long time, but you can whip it. Except they're bright pink when you make them, but when you cook them, they go like a chocolatey color because cooked blood is chocolate.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's just fascinating if you're interested in the scientific part of it. It's just, you just think eggs, blood, just take the eggs out, put the blood in.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes, I'm there.
Okay, good.
You got Justin excited.
Yeah, I'm excited. He's like, I'm fidgeting in my seat. He feels excited. Adam, you got any questions?
I guess I was going to ask if like some really good entry level kind of recipes with blood, but I think you kind of answered that with the egg. I guess that's an easy way for anyone to get into it. And since blood is such a unique and polarizing ingredient, I recommend that people could also go and buy some from the grocery store to try it out first before they go through the whole process of cutting a pig's throat or digging around in butcher shops for it. You can often find blood sausage in a lot of grocery stores, so bring some home and fry it up for breakfast and see if you like it maybe before jumping head first into it all.
I think sometimes when you add the sugar to it, or the chocolate to it, it really makes it a different kind of taste, and it's not that savory taste, and sometimes more passable for people to eat blood. But really, it's just, it's not any weirder than any other part of the animal we eat. It's just it's in people's heads that it's weird, right? Because it's just part of the animal. It's a very nutritious part, and in the American abattoir systems, so much of it just gets thrown away. Just gets thrown, which is sacrilege, really.
Yeah.
But hunters are not going to be all doing blood. They're going to be, eating the fat and the bones and the other parts of the animal, I suspect, right?
Well, let's move on then to, what do you think, bones, Justin?
Yeah, let's go to bones. I guess why do you think, sort of, and talk broadly, Adam and I are big bone fans. We love bones. So just speaking widely to sort of like everyone, why should folks be hanging on to bones? What's the value with them? And
well, I think the first most obvious thing is making stock. And like stock is one of those basic building blocks of cooking, so you need stock. So you take the bones and you can roast them if you want a dark stock, or you can just leave them. And it's so simple. You just add like some vegetables, celery, carrot, onions, and you bring it up to the boil and you skimmer and you just simmer it for a long time and let it reduce down. And you just have this wonderful, wonderful stock that can go into anything. And especially if you're cooking like I imagine you're braising a lot and stewing things. So you need some sort of liquid. It can be wine, but some stock in there would be really good as well. And then you might say, okay, I've got, like, my freezer is full of stock in these little containers, but you can boil it down, and then freeze it in ice cube containers. So you've got concentrated stock, and then you just add water to it, or just throw that one stock cube into a dish that you're cooking. So you don't have to fill your freezer with gallons of stock, right? There's ways you can use it, but it just seems like you've taken all that meat off the bone. You should be using those bones. And even if you don't make stock with them, if you're roasting something, they make a great roasting rack, and the bones then give some flavor to the gravy or the sauce that you're going to make after you've roasted the section of the animal. And of course, then the other thing is breaking them open and eating the marrow out of the inside.
I love
that is
marrow.
Just one of the best things you can ever do in your life, right?
I think we spent
some salt, toast, a little something like acid capers or something in there. Spread it on toast. It's just, and so good for you. It's full of vitamins. You know, people say Queen Victoria ate roasted marrow bones every day of her life. And she wasn't skinny, but she lived a long time.
I think I would. Maybe I was thinking it was like when I'm old and have no teeth and can't chew things anymore, I'm just going to eat bone marrow. That's it.
Yeah, super nutritious. And there's lots of other things you can do. You can add it to stuff too. You can make puddings out of it. You can make sweet things out of it. You can cut the the marrow into discs, and fry it, right?
Man, I'm thinking one of my favorite restaurants here. So I'm in Washington, D.C. So one of my favorite restaurants here in D.C., they have just like a roasted bone marrow on the menu, and it's just the bones roasted with some toast, a little bit of sea salt, and it's good. And I've since moved on to doing it myself, but oh my gosh, it's just a phenomenal thing.
But also when you're cooking game, which is very lean, like if you had a venison steak or something, like a piece of poached bone marrow on the top of that would be so good, and you're getting some fat then, which is kind of what you need, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Definitely. I made it into compound butters too, using the marrow, whipping it in with butter and creating like kind of a topping for steaks, which is
yes, you can whip it up, just spread it on toast too. You can. I mean, it's just like excellent. So that's the main things with bones. And then I think it's just, well, I don't have to tell hunters this because their meat is coming on the bone, but that's also giving you that flavor. There's nothing better than that. Chewing around the edge of the bone. It's delicious, right? That's just where all the flavor is on the meat.
There's not an animal that passes through my kitchen whole that doesn't end up either in the stock pot or in the oven or in a braising pot, because the value's there.
Exactly.
I just made I was testing a recipe today with venison shank and doing like a Chinese braised kind of cold cut venison shank recipe. So you kind of cook it on the bone in liquid, and then until it's tender, and then cut the meat off and slice it thinly. But then you're left with this big shank bone. So I spent about 10 minutes with a little metal skewer pulling the marrow out for my breakfast all morning. I won't let that go to waste.
There's something satisfying about picking the marrow out of the bone. Of like, once you get it, it's like you won a prize, like at the fair. You're like, yes.
People are actually they say like eating meat is like the origins of the human species, and that's what we've been made to do and all this stuff. People get pretty hot and excited about it, but in truth, bands of humans were roaming around and finding predator kills and breaking open the bones that were left over from marrow well before we were cooking and eating meat. So we're truly marrow eaters more than meat eaters.
Yeah, it's full of vitamins, and it's like fat, so it's really good for you. But it's like 69% unsaturated fat, so feel good about it when you're eating it.
Yeah,
and you can get the marrow out of the bone before you cook if you just let it warm up a bit at room temperature and run a knife around the bone, and then if you have to push in the right direction towards the wide end, but you can pop the whole piece of marrow right out of the bone.
I'll have to try that.
That.
Easy with shorter links and long links, but it actually pops out really well.
Okay. Yeah,
Cool.
I will try that next time.
But something you mentioned that all hunters would end up with meat on the bone. It's kind of a funny thing because I find both of us have done a lot of butchering. I find most people request everything off the bone. They don't want anything to do with the bones. A lot of hunters, and that's crazy because you end up with this whole skeleton. Like you're not dealing with a piece of meat that you bought from the store and deboning. You're ending up with the entire skeleton that you're just throwing away. And with deer, there are some worries about chronic wasting disease, which can be like in the spine and everything. But most people are throwing out all those bones, and I think it's a sin. It's a crazy sin, and we've talked a lot about it. But there's so much opportunities for those bones to expand how many meals you get out of your animal. Whether that animal's a rabbit or a deer or a moose doesn't really matter. There's no reason to be leaving those behind, in my opinion. And even like Jennifer said, you can reduce the stock down into ice cubes, so it's not even taking up space in your freezer in the end.
Yeah. Don't throw those bones away. Use them.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Let's switch over a bit to fat. I think is a good progression as we go through here. I think it's good. We're like walking through the processing of the animal, of like what steps you would be going. So with the fat is in so many things. What can be done sort of in the kitchen with fat?
Well, you need fat. You need fat in your kitchen because it's pretty hard to cook without fat.
Yes.
And then that's what you need to remember. And you also have to remember that fat transfers flavor. Without fat carries flavor. So without fat, you miss a lot of flavors. I guess with you're getting a lot of big bits of fat. So I think probably you, as hunters, need to render a lot of the fat that you get, right? Mm-hmm. And people go, but it's not you just need to chop it up into pieces and add a little water and put it in a very low oven, and the fat will just come out of the lumps into this liquid gold, and then you strain that and you have that in your fridge. So that would be like with the back fat, and then you guys would be lucky enough to get the suet, the fat that's around the kidneys, which is, how it has that fabulous texture because it's inside the body. It's harder and it's crystalline and it breaks apart. And it has kind of like a papery skin on it. You pull that off. And you can grate that. You don't even have to render it. You can grate it and use it. You can grate it and make a pudding with it. You can grate it and put it straight into things. I mean, plum pudding, suet pudding. It's just like the best fat, and it's pretty good for frying it too. So that's that.
I think too, as hunters, we have traditionally a different not differently approach, but a varying approach depending on where you're at and the species you're hunting. Because based on, like, I lived out west in the western part of the United States, and in there you're generally hunting game that's leaner. And then also too, with the difference in like cervids, their fat being more tallowy versus pigs or even like bear, also kind of have that. Those two have the similar fat versus the cervids, which are more tallow, but there's still culinary uses for both.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking more of like deer or something like that. I imagine that bear and even moose fat is quite strong, right? So it's more intense in flavor.
Actually, bear fat is weirdly one of the best fats you could possibly ever use for cooking. It's like this beautiful, mild fat, which you wouldn't expect from a bear. Not a lot of people have gotten to try it. I would say it's probably the best wild fat you could get, and then pig, and then into your deer and moose and everything, where there's a lot of high amounts of stearic acid, making it really waxy in your mouth. Kind of like lamb fat, but even more so. Yeah. So sometimes when you end up with a, corn-fed deer out of the Midwest or something that has a lot of fat on it compared to like a mountain deer or a elk or something up in a cedar swamp somewhere, you end up with a lot of fat that's not as culinarily usable as the fat from like a wild pig or a bear. Do you have any suggestions for non-culinary uses for fat?
I guess you could make candles.
I've done it.
Yeah, you just did it last week, didn't you?
I just did. Yeah, a couple weeks ago. Candles. We make soap.
Soap. Yes.
Soap. I really enjoyed making soap. And my family swears by it for like clearing up blemishes and stuff. They're like, the deer soap is phenomenal for it. And that's been really fun to do. I think the bear fat I've experimented a lot. Somebody brought me, or our buddy Adam Steele brought me like a little small container of it, like one of those little small deli containers. And I did like fat washed whiskey. We put it over oysters. I've used it in pastries.
Yeah.
I think just the broad range. But so if we sort of step away from that, and if we think about just culinary uses in general beyond just frying and cooking, what are some of your go-tos for just the use of fat in sort of recipes, incorporating it?
Well, I mean, if you said you were doing a sausage book, I'm sure you was using a lot of fat in that, because you can't really make sausages without fat.
Yep. Yes.
So that's a good place. You probably need about 30% fat in a good sausage. Or if you're doing like a terrine, that's a way that you can use up odd bits fat and everything. You need fat in that, but you can also slice the fat very thinly if it's cold, chill it down to handle it, and line a terrine dish.
Oh, I never thought of that.
So like that, or you could, put the fat over something, right? Very thin slices it over a scallop or something like that, or wrap a fish if you're fishing, right? That fat thinly sliced you're cooking with it, but you're not cooking it in the liquid form, right? You're just using it that way. And then we haven't mentioned it, but I noticed you pointed out that you get access to a lot of caul fat.
Yes.
That's right. That's something.
And that I'm really jealous, because that is probably my favorite fat. I really want to make a dress out of it. It's so. I'm sure everyone's familiar, but it has that beautiful lacy kind of look, right? And it is just such a great. That's a way to use that for sausages. If you don't want to do stuffing in the, in the casings and all that, you can just use it for that. You can wrap it around a lean piece of meat if you're hunting if you have a lean venison or something like that, you wrap it. It just sticks to itself. You just wrap it and put it over the top. It's just such the best fat. It's very useful. Line a terrine dish with it. You can use it for anything, and you really don't have to do anything. I imagine come out of the animal, soak it in some salted water, and cut off any little bits that are joined to it. It's just it's a fabulous fat. And you could render it too. You can melt it down as well, but it's kind of a waste.
I think it's a waste. Yeah. I mean, if you're just like basic form, taking like a meat patty or a hamburger patty and just wrapping it in that, that to me is the simplest way to use the caul fat. But there's so much, I've wrapped roast. I've done, I've used it to make like little sausages, all kinds of things. It's such a cool. It's fun too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it makes a great casing for anything, right? It's just like wrapping, and if you end up using the offal and the other things, you just can wrap it in this little caul fat parcel, and it's delicious. But it's great because you wrap it around the roast and it's basting the roast, and pretty much it's disappeared by the time you finish cooking it, right? It's just kind of melted into the roast.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And that's something for people who don't enjoy working with venison fat. I found the caul fat doesn't have that same waxy property quite as bad.
Okay.
So that's something, even if you decide not to use any of the deer fat, you definitely should be carefully removing the caul fat as you open up the deer, because it's solid gold in the kitchen.
Is it easy to remove out of the animal?
You just have to be gentle and careful, but it's not difficult. It kind of, as I found, if the deer is hanging, first of all, the organs kind of want to come spilling out a little bit. They'll be kind of held together by that caul fat.
Yeah.
So that's the time to slowly, gently kind of take it off in as big of a piece as you can and make little incisions to remove it. But that's something that most people just let slump into the gut pile, and we'll talk about the other guts that are being left behind there too. But that's another one of those cardinal sins, I think, in the hunting world, is that people are leaving that caul fat behind.
I think it's easy to manage if you go into it knowing that you want to take it with you, because like just from the beginning of sort of like of taking the organs and stuff out of the animal, you have to be very conscious of like, if I go in too quickly with the knife, I'm going to cut it. And then it's almost, I find it challenging to get it out in one whole piece. Usually it's like 2 or 3 sections that I'm getting. Mm-hmm. And then depending on how skilled people are with the knife, as far as removing the other organs, if you nick the stomach or something and you get some of that contents on the caul fat, you generally have to trim that bit away.
Yeah.
So that's I think the only nuances, but it's there. I mean, I'm trying to think animals out west, like pronghorn antelope, almost no caul fat because they're so lean. Yeah. And then some like whitetail and elk and some of those bigger deer have loads of it. Well, elk's not a deer; it's an elk. But good thing this isn't a zoological podcast. Yes. I would be voted off. All right, let's transition a bit to the odd bits, and I think actually I got some questions too, some fan questions that we'll tack on at the end of this before we go to bitter, but we'll hit them both. So, Adam and I have talked a lot about Offal, and we love it. What are some of your favorites?
Ooh, of course I like it all, right? One of my favorites is crispy pig's ears.
Ooh, yes.
And I like to order them out because they're such a pain to make yourself, because all that collagen in the pig's ear makes you cook them first and then you deep fry them or fry them. But all that collagen in the ear makes the little pieces all stick together, and then they all stick together in your fryer, and it's still moist. It explodes everywhere. So it's really kind of... but it's...
I burned myself pretty bad making
ears once. You can. Yeah. So you have to be really careful. But it's that contrast between the cartilage. It's a textural thing. It's, the cartilage and the chewy pig skin. Love that. Love liver. What else do I like? Brains. I've really come around to brains. I hated them as a kid because they were brains. Ooh. But, brain, that's what everyone... They have no taste, really. They just have a very soft... It's like eating whipped cream. They just have this wonderful texture. So, coat them in flour, egg, and breadcrumbs and fry them, and then you'll like them, or make a croquette out of them, and then you can move on to stuffing pasta, brain ravioli with, make a mixture with cream and brains and a mushroom, and you can make your own pasta, or you can buy wonton wrappers and use 2 wonton wrappers to make your ravioli, and it's so delicious.
Oh, wow. What a cool idea.
Because
my brain just went speeding off with that.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, man. Yeah. I do have to ask you, this is a question from Hank Shaw. He said, what are your nemesis? What odd bit was your least favorite?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. I'm not a big fan of eyeballs. Would you call that an odd bit?
Yeah. I would classify that the odd bit.
I can agree with that too. I never enjoy them as much as I want to.
Yeah, I've eaten pretty much everything I've been able to get my hands on, my teeth into, no, I like tripe. I like liver. I like kidneys. Maybe I don't mind steak and kidney pie, but just kidneys. Like my husband loves, when you get the whole kidney, don't cut it, and then you just it gets cooked like that. And he was always eating that in France. That's just a little too much kidney for me. Smaller pieces, I'm fine, especially like a veal kidney or lamb's kidneys grilled, fine. But that big whole kidney cooked, and then you have to cut it and eat it. That's probably...
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I'm kidneys I'm on the fence about. Adam's trying hard to get me into them, and every time we're together, it seems as though he cooks kidneys. And they're good. I just like, yeah.
They're intense. They're like an odd bit that really hits you in the face. That you can't miss them at all, right? So it's just like.
And even I find it challenging a little bit too. Like kidneys, I've had them in a lot of ways where I didn't enjoy them, so I've been trying to go on a bit of a culinary journey to find ways where I really do enjoy them. But they were probably one of the more challenging ones for me as well. They just, like you said, they just had this a texture that's unlike other meat, and then a flavor that's unlike anything else. That's pretty strong. So they benefit from some taming sometimes.
So I will say one organ meat in the United States, we don't have access to lungs openly, but as hunters, we have access to lungs. What are your suggestions for sort of cooking lungs?
Well, I don't have a lot of access to lungs either. I've only really cooked them once, and that was to make in my book that sow lung soup, which is a recipe from Germany. And I had a whole fear of lungs, which I talk about, because people said you had to have the trachea hanging over the pot so the lungs could breathe. And because I never did any biology at school, I had this vision when I bought them from my French butcher, because it's no problem. I just went in and I said, can I have lungs? And he said, of course. I said, veal's lungs? He said, yeah, they're best. And I said, can I just buy one? He said, no, they come in pairs, madam. So I had 2 lungs, and they were so light. Well, of course, and I kind of thought they would be like balloons, but they're not. They're like all these little
bladed. Yeah,
they're a bit like a sweetbread texture, that segmenty kind of thing. And so they're mild. They almost have no flavor at all. So in the soup, it's like a bit of a texture. And then there's anchovies and capers in there and heart and other things. And it's delicious soup, but it's kind of vinegar makes it sour. But I would say if you get access to lungs, you could just braise them. And I might be inclined to braise them with like chilies or Provençal tomatoes, olives, onions, things like that to give them some flavor, because you're not getting flavor out of the lungs. So I would soak them in salted water, poach them slightly for a little bit, put a weight because they'll just float on the surface of the water, poach them, then cut them up into bits and braise them with some kind of interesting sauce, because they're very mild. The texture's not challenging like kidneys or tripe, but you'll need something to give them a bit of oomph.
I actually have people can't see it, but I just have a bag of lung that I'm thawing out of my fridge right now, actually, because Robbie Burns Day is coming up, and I usually make a haggis for everyone. So I'm making these are venison lungs I got from Friends Deer, and I have the heart and liver setting aside as well. So I'm going to be cooking that tomorrow. So I'll be making them
nice.
tomorrow. Yeah,
I'm on my way.
Yeah.
But you could chop them up. I'm sure you could put them into a sausage or something like that as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Definitely.
Sausage or terrine.
Yeah.
Cool. Lungs. All right, Adam, I'll turn it over to you.
What are some of the more? I know you've eaten a lot of offal as well as cooking. Can you list a couple of the more like interesting ones you've discovered around the world? Some that might have made you pause.
Well, I guess
even
other than testicles, you mean?
Yeah. Well, testicles included.
I mean, yeah.
That's another thing that's super mild as well. I like tête de veau, calf's head. Where it's actually boned out, the whole head is boned out, and then the tongue is put back in there, then it's poached, and then it's cut into slices, cooked. And so you've got all the things of the head back in the head skin, and so you've got that fatty outside layer, and then it gets sliced, and some people have it warm with like a vinaigrette, kind of with like a lot of oomph in it, or you can have it fried too, like, so you get that crispiness and then you get that gelatinous. It's a mixture of textures. You've got the tongue in there. That's what makes it really, really interesting to eat. And another thing I've only had a few times is coxcombs.
Oh, interesting.
So
it's like
they're
rooster,
visually
like
interesting.
Rooster.
Yeah, on the rooster or the hen that's on both animals. And I've had them in, there's bouche à la reine, which is a classic French dish and usually has, not so much anymore, but coxcombs, chicken testicles, sweetbreads in this creamy sauce in a vol au vent. It's absolutely delicious. So again, the coxcombs don't really have a flavor. They take on the flavor of anything else that they've had. And twice I had it sweet. I had this dessert, which was blood ice cream, was in Montreal. And then there was a coxcomb, which they cooked in blood orange juice very slowly. So it was kind of like a gummy bear.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of more that texture with not really sweet, but like and then a friend of mine made chocolate blood ice cream, and he put them as a garnish on the top of the ice cream. So that's just one of those things that I've seen them in Italy a lot, but I haven't seen them. You can get them here and you can cook them. They're not hard to cook, but takes a while to get enough to make a meal.
Yeah.
So you have to start collecting them from somewhere.
So we had a question from one of our followers on Instagram. Her name is Heidi. She's also one of our staff writers as well. She said, "What is your favorite cultural specific organ dish?"
Ooh, cultural specific. I don't know.
That's fine. We've talked about several, so
I might say sweetbreads. I always think of them as being specifically French. A lot of other cultures do them, but the French do sweetbreads really well. And they're relatively easy to get. And then you can get things like lamb sweetbreads, which are a little bit smaller and really delicious.
It worked. My first restaurant in New Orleans I cooked at was Bryston's restaurant, and they had veal sweetbreads on the menu, and it was the first time I had ever had it, and phenomenal. Oh my gosh, so good.
Yeah, it's one sweetbread that really has a prestige thing to it. It's one you'll see it. You'll see liver too, but you'll see sweetbreads in fancy restaurants. It's one of those kind of things that's just stayed there at the top of the pops for Offal, right?
Mm-hmm. Something I learned when we had John, Dr. John Reisman on the podcast last year. I don't know if you know of him, but he's a medical doctor who's very much into organs, cooking organs.
Oh yeah. He's written a book, hasn't he?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
He's a very cool guy. Because I was always looking for sweetbreads in the animals I harvested, and could rarely find them. And he said that it's actually an organ that kind of disappears as animals get older. Yeah. We tend to eat such young domestic animals, but when we're hunting, we sometimes end up with older animals, and that's an organ you can't always find. And I spent hours looking for them, and I finally learned from him that they're not always available.
No,
where is it?
It's only in younger animals, and there's the sweetbreads that are the throat sweetbreads that are kind of longer, and then there's the one that's on the top of the heart. That's bigger and rounder. It's the one you see in restaurants more often. The throat one tends to break apart more easily. And they are, as the animal ages, they disappear. So that's why you couldn't find them. And you have to be careful. Sometimes I find a lot of people throw in the pancreas because it kind of looks a bit like a sweetbread, but it isn't. So that's always there. But you want real sweetbreads. That's
cool. That was the first time I was able to, because my parents never went out to eat anything fancy, or fancy in quotes at all. And the first time I went to a really good restaurant in London, Ontario, where I grew up, sweetbreads were on the menu. I ordered them, and I remember that specifically being the first dish of like haute cuisine that I'd ever tried, and it blew my mind. And
excellent.
I think it really set me. I was already on the course, kind of heading in this direction, but I think that those sweetbreads really made a physical difference in my life. They were so tasty.
But there's a lot of other parts of the animal. Like I think probably one of the most approachable offal things, despite its shape, is a heart, because the heart is so versatile. You can eat it raw. Like it makes the best steak tartare. And you can also slice it very thinly and saute it, like stir fry with thinly sliced heart. You can cube it and do little skewers, kebabs with it, anchichuchos from Peru, like little lime juice and chili on there. Or you can braise it slowly like any other meat, right? And it's so simple to cook, so versatile. And once it's cooked, I don't ever suggest roasting it whole. Lots of old recipes stuff the heart and roast it whole, and then you bring the heart to the table and slice it up. Well, you're going to lose all your guests right there. But if you put it into a stew, or you make little kebabs with it, or simplest thing, grind it up, mix it with some fat, make a heart burger. Delicious.
That's something I don't think I've ever had. It's a straight up heart burger.
I haven't either. I was just thinking about that. We may have to give that one a run. My favorite is the Japanese skewers. That's like the sauce that pairs with that is just phenomenal, and the grilling, you get like tenderness of the heart with a little crispy on the outside, and it's just like it's phenomenal.
It's so tasty because it's a muscle that's working, and it's just like so simple to cook. You don't need any kind of skill to cook it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, we call it the gateway organ. Sometimes to get into it.
As far as bitter, I'd say, Adam, I'm going to let you, being more akin to foraging than I am, run away with this section.
Sure, yeah. So foragers, like I'm a forager. I spend a lot of time out there collecting, especially in the spring. You end up with a lot of bitter wild greens.
Yeah.
As a forager, you end up with a lot more bitter fruits and vegetables even than you find domestically. Could you tell us some of the benefits of eating bitter foods culinarily and health-wise?
Well, bitter foods have always been used as medicines. So there's a lot of really good things in there. There's like all this stuff, anti-inflammatories, phytochemicals, all this really good stuff in bitter foods. But the problem with bitterness is foods are bitter for a reason, and it often indicates a poison or something toxic. Now, with all poisons or toxins like caffeine, it's how much you take. So a small amount is sometimes okay, and too much is very bad for you. That's why we have that reaction when we have bitterness, that we go, ugh. But it's still very good for you, especially in the spring. There's traditional foragers in Italy where they forage and they separate out the different greens. And some of them they just eat raw. Some of them they just eat cooked. And some of them they just only use for medicines. And when the scientists tested the toxicology on all of them, they were exactly correct. The most bitter, most toxic ones were the only ones they were using for medicine. So they're using very small parts of them. The other thing about bitterness is it just adds something. It's a bit like salt. Cooking without salt is horrible. Cooking without bitterness is the same thing. It just adds a depth. It doesn't mean your food has to taste bitter. But if you even just make the simplest salad and you have like sweet butter lettuces and you've put in a few bitter greens in there, you've just got a much more complex, much more fascinating, interesting thing to eat. And it keeps your palate going too, And it is good for your digestive system. It starts your palate off. It makes you want to eat something more. It wants you to take another bite, whereas sugar just cuts your palate. Bitterness keeps you interested in the food. So I think all meals, all dishes need just a little bit of bitterness in them to make them more interesting. Like the spring is the best time because there's all those things like dandelions is probably the only one I could forage because I could definitely recognize it, right? But I'm sure there's a lot more than that about in the springtime.
Definitely, but dandelions is a good one because it's something that I would say the majority of people in North America can identify, and the majority of people in North America have them around them somewhere close by.
Yeah.
And for free.
Yeah.
So that's I said the heart was a gateway to organ eating. I'd say dandelions are the gateway to foraging in a lot of ways because they're just so readily available. And it's just a matter of getting used to that bitterness, I think, from them, which the more you eat, the easier it is to eat bitter things.
Yes.
Which is why you see children having such a hard time and adults loving the dark chocolates, the bitters and spirits or the bitter beers or all these different things. You don't see children enjoying those things, but you can work your way up to that.
Well, the thing is with kids too that they have a stronger reaction because the smaller amount of bitterness, poison can kill them than an adult, so they're taking less. So therefore they react much more strongly. Also, as you grow older, I hate to tell you, but your taste buds die off and they don't grow back as quickly as they did. So you can take more bitterness as you get older. And also, if you start training your palate, you just get used to that bitterness, and after a while you might start craving it. So if people are having those dandelion greens, if they're finding them maybe a little too bitter, the answer is fat. Fat's always the answer to life, right? And so you add like a really like a hot bacon dressing on there or some kind of dressing, something with fat, and that fat balances the bitterness, right? Salt is another thing, but fat is like bacon, you've got fat and salt, two things at once, and you mix that in with the bitter greens, or you can blanch them, braise them. That'll cut the bitterness up because I imagine when you're foraging them, they're probably a lot more bitter than what people are used to buying. You can buy a bunch of dandelion greens in the supermarket and it's not really bitter at all.
Yeah, there's times where you can get them at their least bitter, but definitely you're going to end up with a bit more challenging of a flavor than you would run across in the supermarket.
And they're packed with good things, absolutely packed with good things for you.
I was cooking arugula. Probably we grow it here in like a hydroponic tower inside, and it was very much past its prime and was quite bitter. And I took the approach that you mentioned, and I blanched it first before I even put it in the dish. I made like collard greens, like the traditional Southern way.
Yep.
But instead of using collard greens, I used arugula, and then I blanched it in like sweet tea. Is a way to like kind of cut out some of that bitter and like give it some extra flavors. So it was delicious. My kids even ate it.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, it's kind of like when if you grow your own lettuce, and it gets away from you, bolts and all those things are really bitter, but you can still eat them. It's like braising them. Braising is a good way. Braising with fat, braising with some kind of meat or a bit of salt in there. It's a good way to mellow them out and make them still very edible.
I'm wondering too, as I think about that, if like you have like the traditional use of like collard greens, which can be kind of bitter as well, if like that incorporation of pairing it with sort of bacon to have that fat element, it just came about because of a way to, everybody likes bacon, but also like, hey, if I add bacon to it, it also cuts the bitterness of this leaf, which I have in abundance.
Yeah. A lot of those things, you think you've discovered something and you'll go back, and people for thousands of years have been cooking that way. And also it's just what is there at that time, right? Probably when you're foraging the greens, you still have some salted pork somewhere in your house that you need to use up before so it just naturally goes together.
I love seeing examples of that in food history and in current day food things. Just those things that just naturally are harvested at the same time or kept at the same time like that, and they just go together so well. It's mind-boggling sometimes how seasonality and everything affects food like that. I really enjoy it.
Also, there's probably wild berries and some of those things that you can harvest that goes excellently with game, right? And it's just people have stopped thinking about seasons, and they should really think about that. And that's the way to eat. And I think that's why in the springtime, after you've probably been eating rich, heavy food, bitterness kind of clears your palate out. And it gives you that appetite again. And that's what's the first thing coming out of the ground. And you're so desperate after the snow and the cold to eat anything green. And that's, plus it's good for you. It's restoring your body after a long winter.
I love the seasonal palate cleanser. I like that a lot.
Yeah. My son's a big watermelon fan, and he's been on about me to pick up a watermelon, and I was like, no. He's like, well, why? I was like, we eat watermelon in the summer, son. We don't eat watermelon right now. I was like, if we go to the store and buy watermelon, and he's 4, so this is one-sided conversation. But I'm like, if we go to the store right now and buy a watermelon, it's not going to be great. Like, it's not what you want it to be. I was like, wait till the summer, we'll get a watermelon, and it'll be really yummy. And just tell you what, that's part of it. Think about how yummy this watermelon is going to be from now until the summer. And, we'll see how that works because he's 4. But
summer's a long way off for a 4-year-old.
It is hard. You go to the supermarket today and there's every fruit and vegetable. It's no seasonality at all. And then people go, well, these strawberries taste awful. Well, it's the middle of winter, folks. You really need to think about those things, right? And that's what makes them... there's asparagus in the supermarket. It makes me want to tear my hair out. Asparagus is another one of those things. It's just so fabulous in season. The season is so short. Just eat it every day. You'll be so sick of it, you won't want to see it till next spring,
Yeah, that's the way I like to enjoy it.
Yeah. I'll take this one because I think it's an interesting one. Any bitter flavors that you've seen in meat or fish that we should take advantage of?
No, and I'm thinking that's probably not a positive in meat or fish. I don't know. There's people who, I haven't had it yet, but there's a dish I think Filipinos make with cow bile, which would be very bitter. The bile is bitter. They're usually trying to cut that out of things when you see it. So there are some things that you can use. I don't know about fish. I don't know about fish at all. Sorry.
No. Some traditional indigenous practices, they would consume bile as well in the United States, but I'm not. I think those traditions may have passed long ago. I'm not aware of any now. I just know some of the Plain tribes would harvest bile, but also too, it could have been in really dire times when you're just needing either hydration or some sort of nourishment.
I guess back to your point of bitterness as a medicine, one thing that does happen illegally is bear poaching, because the bear gallbladder and the bear bile and everything is collected, and that's something that's been people are trying to stop, obviously, because it's harvesting an animal just for that is ridiculous. But that kind of goes back to that bitterness as medicine thing. The bitter bile might be taken as a medicine of sorts. It's interesting.
I'm sure it is, and I think like most of our medicines have come originally from plants, right? I mean, like aspirin comes from willow bark, and quinine comes from cinchona bark, and all these things. Now they're made pharmaceutically; they're made in a lab, but they all originally came from that. So that's why all those bitter alcohols we enjoy, they originally started off as medicinal ways to preserve the herbs and the bitter things that were growing in an alcohol, distilling them, and so you could get the essence. So it's all come back right from the beginning. We knew that things that were bitter were good for us, and we get to like them. We get to like coffee, like you said, your kids. No kid likes coffee or beer. And then there's a lot of drugs too that have a bitterness to them. So like illegal drugs and legal drugs. So it's something that gets acquired, and it is easier for you to deal with it when your palate gets more developed as you grow up. And then some people are super sensitive to bitter too. Some people are a lot more sensitive to bitter than others. So that changes things.
That's why I drink bitter spirits, and bitters is for my health.
Yes,
only.
exactly.
Yeah.
Me too. Me too. All right. Well, I think we're about out of time. One last sort of question. What's the best place people can sort of follow you or get in touch with your work, get access to your books, all that?
If you just type in my name, I have a website, and then I'm on Instagram at Jennifer McLagan. So that's where I am. I'm not doing anything new. That's my oeuvre for the moment. I'm not sure I have the energy to do another book. I'm very impressed that you're doing something, but you're self-publishing, so good for you. But it's tough out there in the book world these days. And,
we've been discovering that.
We've been discovering that too with another book.
Yeah.
We've got.
But, my books, as I said, what I was really, especially with Odd Bits, I think, was to just get that information down on paper in one place. Because when I was researching that book, I found it harder and harder to find out. I found stupid things like having the trachea hanging over the pot, but to find actual real information of what to look for with the Odd Bit, how to basically clean it, prepare it, and how to cook it. And so that's what I did with that book. And I don't need to do it again.
That's fair. Where can people purchase your book? Books.
There's links on the website, and they're probably on the ubiquitous monster that sells stuff to everybody.
Sure.
But try independent cookbook stores. You try that. Blood comes out of the Good Egg cookbook store in Toronto. She's publishing small books here. Kitchen Arts and Letters, I recommend in New York City. They're very good with that. Jonathan, who has I can't remember the name of the store in Montreal, but they're out there. Some of them are harder and harder to find because some of them are quite old now. Bones is 20 years old this year. So
yeah. And I want to say before we sign off here that when I first encountered that book 20 years ago, I think Fresh on the Shelves, it just followed this natural progression that I discovered with Anthony Bourdain as a young teen, and Michael Ruhlman and all these guys and women that I was reading about and were blowing my mind. And that Bones was the next natural progression, and it really tickled my brain in a special way. And I can't say enough good things about all your books. I've waited anxiously for each one to come out, and I've purchased them, and I use them regularly. We talk about them regularly. And I just wanted to thank you very much for kind of providing me with some structure in my culinary career here, because I think that you were very instrumental in that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. that's exactly kind of what I wanted to do. I've never been a bestseller or, but that wasn't what it was about. It was about, just doing something that was worth cutting the tree down for.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. The conversation was awesome. You've continued to spark my interest as well, and a lot for me to explore now, even after this conversation. And I want to thank everybody out there for listening, and whatever podcast platform you're listening to, punch that 5-star button, leave us a review, let us know what we're doing wrong, or let us know what we're doing right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.